How to detach emotionally without becoming cold. There comes a point in your life when you realize that caring the way you always have is costing you more than you can afford. You start feeling drained by people's moods, pulled into problems that aren't yours, and emotionally exhausted by situations you never asked to carry. You love deeply, but that depth often turns into weight. You show up for everyone, but somehow end up feeling empty. So a quiet question begins whispering inside you. How do I protect my heart without losing it? How do I detach without becoming cold? Most people think emotional detachment means shutting down, withdrawing, or becoming distant. But that is not detachment. That is self-abandonment disguised as self-protection. The truth is, you don't want to stop feeling. You don't want to stop caring. You simply want to stop drowning in emotions that aren't yours. You want to stop absorbing the chaos around you. You want your peace back without losing your warmth. You want to stay open without staying vulnerable to everyone. Stoicism understood this tension perfectly. They never taught people to be emotionless. They taught people to stop being controlled by emotions that don't belong to them. They taught presence, not numbness, strength, not coldness. They taught the art of caring from clarity instead of fear. You are not here to disconnect from life. You are here to stay connected to yourself while life happens around you. You've probably tried both extremes. You've cared too much and ended up drained. Then you've shut down completely and ended up feeling numb, disconnected, or guilty. Neither of these approaches work because they are driven by reaction, not intention. That is why you feel torn. You want peace, but you don't want to lose your humanity. You want boundaries, but you don't want to become hard-hearted. You want distance, but not isolation. What you are really searching for is emotional balance, the ability to stay steady in the middle of other people's storms, the ability to feel without collapsing, to care without absorbing, to love without losing yourself. This is the Stoic balance, a state where your heart stays open, but your mind stays anchored, a state where you remain compassionate but not burdened, connected but not consumed. This video will take you to that place. You will learn why you get overwhelmed, why you confuse empathy with responsibility, and why detachment has always felt like losing a part of yourself. You will discover the deeper reasons behind emotional overload and the subtle traps that pull you into other people's chaos. And most importantly, you will learn how to detach in a way that protects your peace without freezing your heart. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming clear. It is about reclaiming the emotional space that was always meant to belong to you. And once you learn this balance, you will never give your peace away so easily again. Why you think detachment means becoming cold, the false dichotomy. Most people think emotional detachment and emotional coldness are the same thing, but they come from opposite places. Coldness is a reaction. Detachment is a decision. Coldness is born from hurt, fear, or exhaustion. Detachment is born from clarity. But because you've only ever detached when you were overwhelmed, you learn to associate detachment with shutting down. You learned it as escape, not balance. So you carry the belief that protecting yourself requires losing something essential in you. This belief creates an emotional split. When you care too much. When you pull back completely. You swing between extremes because you were never shown the middle ground. No one taught you how to stay emotionally present without absorbing everything around you. No one taught you how to care without carrying, so you assume your only options are attachment or numbness, connection or distance, warmth or armor. This is the false dichotomy keeping you trapped. Stoicism dismantles this illusion. The Stoics didn't avoid emotion. They avoided losing themselves in emotion. They understood that detachment is not the absence of feeling, but the refusal to let feelings override wisdom. Emotional coldness disconnects you from others. Emotional detachment reconnects you to yourself. One closes the heart, the other protects it. The reason you fear becoming cold is because you know how valuable your empathy is. You know your warmth has meaning. You know your sensitivity is a gift. But the same qualities that make you compassionate also make you vulnerable to emotional overload. You carry people's stress until it feels like your own. You confuse empathy with responsibility. You invest in problems that drain you. You believe helping others means absorbing their pain. Eventually, the weight becomes too much and shutting down becomes the only tool you know. But there is a deeper reason you confuse detachment with coldness. You were trained to equate love with emotional labor. You learned that caring means constant involvement, immediate response, and limitless patience. You learned that saying, "This is not mine to carry," feels selfish, even when it is the healthiest thing you could say. So when you finally reach your limit, you collapse instead of recalibrating. Detachment is not collapse. Detachment is not withdrawal. Detachment is choosing what belongs to you and what never did. Detachment is freeing your mind so your heart can finally breathe. Once you understand this, the fear of becoming cold dissolves. You realize your warmth was never the problem. Your lack of boundaries was. The emotional weight you're carrying that isn't yours. Every person you connect with brings a certain emotional presence. Some bring calm, some bring clarity, but many bring weight. Weight they never learned to carry themselves. And without realizing it, you pick it up. Not because you want to suffer, not because you lack boundaries, but because you were conditioned to believe that caring means absorbing the emotions of others. So you take on their fears, their frustrations, their instability, their chaos. You clean up messes you didn't create. You soothe reactions you didn't trigger. You take responsibility for pain that was never yours. Over time, you don't just carry your emotions. You carry an entire emotional ecosystem. And because you've been doing it for so long, it feels normal. It feels automatic. You don't even notice where your emotional world ends and someone else's begins. You feel heavy without knowing why. You feel drained without obvious cause. You feel guilty for wanting space, even though most of your exhaustion comes from people who take more than they give. Stoicism identifies this as one of the greatest sources of unnecessary suffering, mistaking what is outside your control as something within your responsibility. When you internalize another person's emotional volatility, you cross a line the Stoics warned about for centuries. You begin to live in their world instead of your own. You react to their moods. You adjust to their instability. You base your peace on their behavior. You lose the ability to regulate your own emotions because theirs dominate your internal landscape. This emotional merging doesn't make you strong. It makes you invisible. You disappear under the weight you keep absorbing. And the more you carry, the more people give. Not out of malice, but out of habit. They become accustomed to your strength, your patience, your willingness to step in. They offload their emotional burdens because you make it so easy. The problem is that you confuse this role with kindness, when in reality it is self-abandonment. Detachment begins with identifying the weight that isn't yours, the frustration someone else refuses to manage, the anxiety someone unloads into your space, the guilt someone places on your shoulders, the emotional responsibility someone never learned to hold. When you see clearly what you've been carrying, you realize the heaviness you feel says nothing about your capacity and everything about how much you've taken on. You do not need to become cold to protect yourself from this. You need to return the emotional weight to its rightful owner. You need to reclaim the space inside you that was taken up by burdens you were never meant to hold. And once you do, detachment stops feeling like distance and starts feeling like freedom. The Stoic principle of internal versus external responsibility. Emotional exhaustion often comes from one simple confusion. You have been treating what is outside your responsibility as if it lived inside your control. This is where most suffering begins. The Stoics warned about this endlessly. They taught that life becomes unnecessarily heavy the moment you assume responsibility for things that were never yours to manage. Other people's reactions, choices, insecurities, and emotional storms. You try to fix what you cannot influence. You try to soothe what you did not create. You try to stabilize people who have no intention of stabilizing themselves. When you don't understand this separation, you live in a constant state of emotional tension. You feel anxious because you're monitoring someone else's mood. You feel guilty because you can't meet expectations that were unrealistic from the start. You feel responsible because someone convinced you that caring means stepping into roles you never agreed to play. This is not compassion. This is entanglement. And entanglement is the opposite of Stoic detachment. The Stoics separated life into two domains, what you can control and what you cannot. But in relationships, we tend to reverse it. We overlook what is ours, our boundaries, our choices, our reactions, and obsess over what isn't. How someone feels, how someone behaves, how someone perceives us. We abandon our internal world in an attempt to regulate someone else's. The result is predictable. We lose our peace, but nothing improves. We sacrifice our emotional stability, but nothing changes. We exhaust ourselves trying to manage outcomes we were never meant to influence. Emotional detachment begins when you reclaim that boundary. When you stop confusing empathy with responsibility. When you understand that you can support someone without absorbing them. When you let people feel what they feel without making it a reflection of your worth. This is the internal shift the Stoics considered essential to freedom. You are responsible for your mind, not theirs. This principle does not make you cold. It makes you clear. You stop rushing to fix everything the moment tension rises. You stop making other people's disappointment a personal failure. You stop seeing someone's anger as something you must calm. You stop treating instability as a cue to sacrifice yourself. Instead, you observe. You listen. You stay present without losing your center. You offer compassion without surrendering your peace. When you honor this Stoic boundary, something powerful happens. You stop drowning in emotions that don't belong to you. You stop reacting to every disturbance around you. You stop abandoning yourself to maintain relationships. And for the first time, you understand what true emotional balance feels like. Caring deeply, yet being free from the weight of what is not yours. Why you keep getting hurt. The emotional hooks others use without realizing. Not every emotional wound comes from cruelty. Most of the time, the people who drain you aren't malicious. They're unaware. They pull you into their emotional world through subtle hooks, patterns you've been conditioned to respond to without even noticing. And because these hooks feel familiar, you interpret them as connection rather than entanglement. You confuse emotional urgency with intimacy. You mistake intensity for depth. You believe that being needed means being valued. These hooks form in small, predictable ways. A person becomes distant, and you feel compelled to chase their attention. Someone becomes upset, and you jump in to soothe their emotions. Someone unloads their stress, and you immediately shift into problem-solving mode. These reactions feel automatic because you learned early on that stability depends on how quickly you can manage someone else's emotional state. Your nervous system responds before your mind even has time to assess what's happening. The Stoics would call this an unexamined impulse, an emotional reflex shaped by past experiences, not present truth. When someone around you spirals, your instinct is to step in. When someone withdraws, your instinct is to fix the distance. When someone shows disappointment, you try to repair it before they even ask. These impulses make you a comforting presence, but they also make you vulnerable. People who lack emotional regulation sense this. They may not do it intentionally, but they quickly learn that when they express distress, you respond. When they show dissatisfaction, you correct. When they create tension, you absorb it. These are emotional hooks, behaviors that trigger old patterns within you. And as long as those patterns remain unconscious, you'll continue responding even when it harms you. You won't see the hook, you'll only feel the pull. What makes these hooks dangerous is how they mimic emotional connection. You convince yourself you're helping. You believe they rely on you, you feel needed. But being needed is not the same as being respected. Being depended on is not the same as being valued. You end up pouring energy into relationships that don't deepen you, they drain you. Relationships where your willingness becomes a tool and your compassion becomes a burden. Detaching emotionally does not mean rejecting people. It means recognizing the hooks that keep pulling you into responsibilities that aren't yours. It means responding with awareness instead of reflex. It means asking yourself, is this mine to hold, before stepping into someone else's emotional storm. When you break these automatic reactions, you break the patterns that have been hurting you for years. You don't become colder, you become wiser. And wisdom protects your heart far better than withdrawal ever could. Detachment versus disconnection, the line you must not cross. When emotional exhaustion pushes you too far, you don't detach, you disconnect. You shut down, you go silent, you build walls instead of boundaries. And even though this reaction protects you temporarily, it comes with a cost. You lose parts of yourself in the process. Your warmth, your presence, your capacity to care, they all get buried under emotional armor you never meant to wear. This is why so many people fear detachment. They only know it as the moment they stop feeling anything at all. But detachment and disconnection are not the same. Disconnection is withdrawal. Detachment is clarity. Disconnection is a survival mechanism. Detachment is a conscious practice. Disconnection freezes your heart. Detachment frees it. Yet because both involve stepping back, the difference between them becomes blurred. You assume that protecting yourself requires shutting down your emotional world, when in truth, it requires understanding where your emotional world ends. Disconnection says, I can't handle this. Detachment says, this is not mine to carry. Disconnection numbs you. Detachment stabilizes you. Disconnection cuts the cord out of fear. Detachment loosens the emotional grip so you can breathe. Stoicism teaches that emotional mastery is not achieved by escaping emotions, but by placing them in their proper place. You remain present, but not entangled. You remain open, but not overwhelmed. You remain compassionate, but not consumed. This is the balance that keeps you human without leaving you unprotected. You cross into disconnection when you stop addressing your own needs. You hold everything in. You suppress instead of express. You silence yourself to avoid conflict. You pretend not to care because caring feels dangerous. This is emotional shutdown, and it leads not to strength but to isolation. It may feel safer, but it's a prison built from past wounds, not future wisdom. Detachment, on the other hand, is rooted in awareness. You understand what belongs to you and what doesn't. You respond instead of react. You create distance without building walls. You listen without absorbing. You care without losing yourself. You don't close your heart. You simply stop placing it in unsafe hands. The line between detachment and disconnection becomes clear the moment you ask yourself a single question. Am I stepping back to protect myself? Or am I stepping back because I don't trust myself to stay centered? The first is wisdom. The second is fear. Emotional detachment is choosing wisdom. Once you learn this distinction, something remarkable happens. You no longer fear boundaries. You no longer see emotional space as rejection. You no longer believe distance equals indifference. You begin to understand that staying connected to others starts with staying connected to yourself, and that is the foundation of the Stoic balance. Developing the Stoic core. Calm, not cold. Emotional detachment is not built on distance. It is built on inner steadiness, what the Stoics called ataraxia, a state of calm that cannot be shaken by external noise. This is the Stoic core, the place within you that remains steady no matter how turbulent the world becomes. When this core is strong, you don't become cold, detached, or unreachable. You simply stop being moved by every emotion, every tone, every shift in someone else's mood. You act from clarity, not reaction. Most people try to create emotional stability by controlling their environment or withdrawing from it. They try to reduce the chaos outside instead of strengthening the calm inside. But the Stoics understood that the world will never stop presenting challenges. People will continue to be unpredictable. Circumstances will continue to shift. Emotions will continue to rise and fall. True detachment comes from strengthening your internal anchor, not from trying to freeze your emotions or shut people out. Developing a Stoic core begins with regulating your internal state. Instead of absorbing someone's anger, you observe it. Instead of reacting to someone's mood, you remain grounded in your own. Instead of trying to fix every disturbance, you recognize that your role is to respond with intention, not panic. You remain aware of what is yours and what is not. The world still moves, but you no longer move with it unless you choose to. Calm is not the same as indifference. Calm is not the absence of emotion. Calm is controlled emotion. It's the ability to feel without being overtaken, to care without collapsing, to show empathy without losing your balance. This is the strength people often misinterpret as coldness because they have never experienced someone who can be both open and steady. But the Stoic core allows you to express warmth without being consumed by it. As your inner steadiness grows, your relationships change. You stop reacting to every emotional shift around you. You stop letting other people's storms dictate your peace. You stop making decisions out of panic, fear, or guilt. People notice this shift. Some will feel intimidated because they can no longer sway you with tension. Some will feel relieved because your presence becomes grounding rather than reactive. And the ones meant to stay in your life will feel safer with you, not threatened. Detaching emotionally does not require you to feel less. It requires you to feel differently. You stop letting emotions sweep you away and start using them as information rather than instruction. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to breathe before speaking. You learn to observe before absorbing. Calm becomes your power. And because calm has nothing to do with coldness, your heart remains open, but protected by wisdom. This is the foundation of emotional detachment done right. Not withdrawal, not hardness, balance. The power of observing without absorbing. One of the greatest emotional skills you can develop, perhaps the skill that transforms your life the fastest, is the ability to observe without absorbing. Most people don't realize how much suffering comes from merging their emotional state with someone else's. You hear someone's frustration, and suddenly you feel responsible. You witness someone's disappointment, and you internalize it as failure. You feel someone's anxiety, and your nervous system mirrors it as if it were your own. Without noticing, you live in a constant emotional echo of the people around you. Observation breaks that cycle instantly. It creates a psychological boundary between your perception and your participation. You begin to notice the tone, the behavior, the mood, without making it your personal obligation to fix, carry, or resolve it. You see clearly, but you don't merge with what you see. This is not coldness. This is discipline. The Stoics considered observation one of the highest forms of strength. Epictetus taught that everything begins with the impression, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, but the power lies in the pause that comes before your reaction. When you observe an emotion without absorbing it, you reclaim your authority. You choose how to respond instead of letting the moment choose for you. This skill changes everything. When someone around you becomes agitated, you no longer match their intensity. You recognize the emotion as theirs, not yours. When someone projects insecurity, you no longer shrink in response. You see the projection without internalizing the narrative. When someone tries to pull you into drama, you remain aware of the invitation, but decline the emotional cost. You become present, grounded, and self-contained. People often fear that observing without absorbing will make them distant, but the opposite is true. It makes you more emotionally available because you no longer drown in what others feel. You can listen without losing yourself. You can support without sacrificing your sanity. You can offer compassion without carrying someone's entire emotional burden. Your presence becomes cleaner, stronger, more stable. This ability also sharpens your intuition. Because you're no longer lost in emotional noise, you begin to see patterns you missed before. You detect manipulation early. You notice inconsistencies immediately. You recognize when someone's emotional expression is genuine or when it's a strategy. When you stop absorbing, you stop being easily influenced. You stop being easily guilted. You stop being easily destabilized. Observing without absorbing is the art of staying open while staying intact. It is the foundation of emotional detachment. It allows you to participate in life fully while protecting your inner world. It allows you to feel without falling apart. It allows you to care without losing yourself. This is where detachment begins turning into autonomy. And autonomy is where your emotional power truly emerges. Reclaiming your emotional autonomy. There is a moment in your growth when something becomes unmistakably clear. Your emotions belong to you and no one else should have the power to direct them. This realization is the beginning of emotional autonomy. The ability to feel what you feel, choose what you accept, and step back from anything that destabilizes your inner world. It is the point where you stop allowing other people's behavior to dictate your state of mind. And once you reach this stage, everything in your life begins to reorganize around your strength. For most of your life, your emotions reacted to your environment. If someone was upset, you felt uneasy. If someone was distant, you felt insecure. If someone was angry, your body tightened. If someone withdrew, you chased. You adjusted yourself constantly to preserve connection. You didn't know it, but you were outsourcing your emotional stability to other people. Their actions determined your peace. Their moods shaped your day. Their validation decided your worth. Stoicism calls this slavery of the mind, the quiet dependence on external conditions to feel centered. Emotional autonomy dissolves that dependence. You reclaim the authority you gave away without realizing it. You stop letting someone's unpredictability become your anxiety. You stop letting someone's disappointment become your guilt. You stop letting someone's silence become your self-doubt. Instead of reacting to everything, you choose what deserves your energy and what does not. This doesn't make you disconnected. It makes you discerning. You no longer operate on emotional reflex. You operate on emotional choice. When someone tries to pull you into chaos, you stay grounded. When someone tries to provoke a reaction, you remain steady. When someone tries to manipulate your empathy, you recognize it instantly. Your peace stops depending on whether others behave well. It comes from the standards you set and the boundaries you enforce. Autonomy also means no longer abandoning yourself for connection. You stop shrinking to avoid conflict. You stop suppressing your needs to keep the peace. You stop absorbing blame that doesn't belong to you. Instead, you become someone who respects your own emotional space as much as you once respected everyone else's. Your self-worth no longer wavers depending on other people's responses. It becomes anchored in truth, not approval. And here's the most important part. Emotional autonomy does not reduce your ability to love. It deepens it. Because love offered from autonomy is clean, steady, and real. It isn't desperate. It isn't anxious. It isn't conditional. When your emotions are your own, your care becomes intentional instead of compulsive. Your presence becomes grounded instead of overwhelmed. Your boundaries become firm instead of reactive. This is the transformation Stoicism points toward, not a cold heart, but a centered one. And once you reclaim your emotional autonomy, you become someone who can remain open without being thrown off balance. How Stoics loved deeply without losing themselves. One of the greatest misconceptions about Stoicism is the belief that the Stoics avoided emotion, connection, or intimacy. In reality, they loved with remarkable depth, but they did so without losing themselves. They understood that true love is not found in emotional fusion, but in emotional clarity. They believed that relationships should strengthen your character, not dissolve your identity. This is the part of Stoicism most people never learn. The Stoics were not cold. They were anchored, Take Marcus Aurelius. He led an empire, yet wrote tenderly about those he loved. He cared, but he did not collapse under the weight of others' emotions. He remained present without becoming entangled. He knew how to stand beside people without carrying what was theirs to carry. Seneca comforted friends through grief, loss, and suffering, yet maintained a steady internal state. He offered compassion, not absorption, support, not entanglement, presence, not sacrifice of self. This is the Stoic model of love. Warmth without overwhelm, connection without dependency, closeness without emotional instability. They understood a truth that most people today struggle with, that love becomes painful, not because you feel too much, but because you forget where you end and someone else begins. The Stoics placed great value on affection, loyalty, and community, but they did so with firm boundaries and a clear sense of inner direction. Modern relationships often confuse intensity with connection. We are taught that love must be chaotic to be real, that emotional highs and lows prove passion, that self-sacrifice is noble. But the Stoics saw instability as a sign of untrained emotion, not deep emotion. They encouraged people to remain open-hearted, but not open-wounded. They knew that if you lose yourself in someone else, the love you give becomes unpredictable, anxious, and distorted. You cannot love deeply when you are constantly losing your center. Stoics loved from abundance, not depletion. They loved from clarity, not confusion. They loved with intention, not compulsion. This form of love does not make you distant. It makes you trustworthy. People feel safe with someone who remains steady. They feel respected by someone who knows their own limits. They feel valued by someone who can care without collapsing. This is the kind of love that grows, not drains. When you detach from what is not yours, you create space to offer what truly is: your presence, your warmth, your truth, your steadiness. You no longer overextend to earn love. You no longer abandon yourself to keep the peace. You no longer confuse losing yourself with loving someone else. You love in a way that preserves both your heart and your dignity. This is how the Stoics balanced emotion, by grounding themselves so deeply that love never turned into self-sacrifice. And when you learn this balance, you stop fearing attachment and start experiencing connection in its truest form. The identity shift, becoming someone who stays warm but unaffected. There comes a point in your emotional journey when something profound begins to change inside you, not because of a dramatic event, but because you finally understand who you are without the layers of fear, overgiving, or emotional merging that once defined you. This is the identity shift. It is the moment you become someone who can stay warm without becoming overwhelmed, compassionate without being consumed, connected without losing yourself. This identity does not harden, it stabilizes. In your earlier self, emotional boundaries felt unnatural. Saying no felt rude, creating distance felt selfish, protecting your peace felt like abandonment. But as your clarity grows, you begin to see that these reactions came from an identity built on insecurity and self-sacrifice. You weren't naturally overwhelmed, you were trained to be. You weren't naturally responsible for everyone. You were conditioned to carry what others placed on you. You weren't naturally afraid of detachment. You confused it with loneliness. The new identity emerges when these illusions fall away. You begin to trust your perception instead of doubting it. You begin to value your time instead of giving it away freely. You begin to honor your emotional limits instead of stretching them to accommodate others. You begin to see that your empathy is a gift when directed wisely, but a weakness when you let it be exploited. As this awareness deepens, warmth stops being something you lose. It becomes something you choose. This version of you responds instead of reacts. You don't absorb tension the moment it appears. You don't spiral because someone else is spiraling. You don't chase reassurance when you already know your worth. Emotional balance becomes instinctive, not forced. People may notice the difference. Some will feel slightly intimidated because they can no longer influence you through guilt or urgency. Others will feel deeply safe around you because your presence is steady, grounded, and trustworthy. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you no longer define yourself through others' perceptions. You no longer fear losing people because you no longer cling to connections that require self-abandonment. You no longer fear detachment because you understand that staying centered is not cold, it is necessary. Your emotional world becomes structured from the inside out, not the outside in. This identity shift is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to the person you were meant to be before life conditioned you into imbalance. A person who loves deeply but wisely. A person who stays open but not exposed. A person who protects their peace as fiercely as they once protected others. Warm but unaffected. Compassionate but self-respecting. Present but centered. This is the version of yourself that cannot be manipulated, drained, or thrown off balance. This is the version of yourself that experiences connection from strength instead of fear. This is emotional detachment at its highest form, not distance, but mastery. Say a Stoic conclusion, letting go of what isn't yours while holding on to yourself. Emotional detachment reaches its highest expression in a single, quiet truth. You were never meant to carry everything you've been carrying. Life becomes lighter the moment you stop absorbing the emotions, expectations, and instability of others, and instead, return that energy where it belongs. Letting go is not rejection, it is realignment. It is standing firmly inside your own emotional space and recognizing that anything that pulls you away from yourself is not yours to hold. The Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that inner peace is not found by fighting the world, but by clarifying your role within it. You cannot control someone's reactions, but you can control the meaning you attach to them. You cannot dictate someone's choices, but you can choose whether those choices influence your peace. You cannot prevent people from projecting their emotions, but you can refuse to internalize what was never meant for your heart. Letting go of what isn't yours does not make you cold, it makes you whole. You realize that emotional clarity is a form of self-respect. You learn that boundaries are not walls but guidelines for harmony. You understand that love without self-preservation becomes self-destruction. And you see that the more you remain anchored in yourself, the more you can offer warmth without losing balance, presence without sacrificing peace, and empathy without dissolving into someone else's storm. This is the Stoic balance. Not withdrawing from life, but engaging with it from a place of strength. Not suppressing emotion, but placing emotions in their proper place. Not cutting people off, but choosing what energy you allow to shape your internal world. You stop giving away parts of yourself that were never meant to be traded. You stop negotiating your worth in relationships. You stop confusing emotional labor with love. As you release what doesn't belong to you, a new clarity emerges. You can see people as they are without attaching your identity to their behavior. You can hear their emotions without drowning in them. You can witness their struggles without making them your own. You gain the ability to stay connected without becoming entangled, to be present without being overwhelmed, to love without losing yourself. This is not a closing of the heart. It is the opening of a new one built on truth instead of fear, wisdom instead of reflex, steadiness instead of desperation. You become someone who chooses peace not because you're avoiding pain, but because you finally understand what real peace feels like. Someone who carries themselves with dignity, someone who remains warm in a cold world without becoming cold themselves. The pattern ends when you stop abandoning yourself. The balance begins when you hold on to who you are with both hands. This is emotional detachment in its purest form. Letting go of what isn't yours while holding on to yourself fully, clearly, and unapologetically.